Spring 1945, somewhere in Texas. Behind barbed wire and watchtowers, hundreds of German women, former
our
nurses, and
duty is
radio
not to
operators
question,
waited in
but to
silence.
serve.
When the
Remember
guards
your
opened the
training,
mess hall doors,
and remember your
they
oath.
expected rations, gray and tasteless, but instead came warm bread, butter melting golden, and pies that smelled of cinnamon and home. The women froze. Some wept. They had seen death and hunger across Europe, and yet here, in the camp of their enemies, they were offered sweetness.
I've never seen
For
such
the
a
first
beautiful
time,
harvest.
they wondered, what kind of
The
people
sun
feed
has been
even
kind
those
to
they've
us this
defeated?
year.
The train had been moving for 3 days. Katherine Vogel pressed her face against the bars of the cattle car, watching America unfold through steel slats, endless flatlands, brush and scrub, sky so blue it hurt to look at, nothing like the ash-gray skies over Dresden, where she'd spent the last year bandaging soldiers who screamed for mothers they'd never see again. "Where are they taking us?" whispered Ruth Brenner beside her. The younger woman's hands trembled. She'd been a radio operator 22 years old, with eyes that had seen too much static and too many decoded death notices. "Does it matter?" Catherine's voice was flat. She was 28, old enough to know that hope was a luxury prisoners couldn't afford. "We're alive. That's more than most." The train lurched to a stop. The doors screeched open, and sunlight poured in like liquid fire. Katherine shielded her eyes. Texas heat hit her like a wall dry, relentless, nothing like the damp cold of German springs. "Out! Line up!" The voice was American, clipped but not cruel. A sergeant stood at the platform, clipboard in hand. He was young, maybe 30, with sandy hair and a face that hadn't yet learned how to hate. His name tag read, Sergeant D. Hargrove. The women stumbled out, blinking. 200 German female POWs, all that remained of a field hospital unit captured in France. Nurses, clerks, radio operators. Most still wore torn uniforms. Some had bandages wrapped around old wounds. Katherine scanned the compound. Rows of white barracks. A mess hall with steam rising from its vents. Guard towers. Yes, but guards who leaned on their rifles instead of aiming them. Flower boxes under some windows. Flower boxes. In a prison camp. "This way, ladies." Hargrove's tone was almost apologetic. He led them past a garden where tomatoes grew fat on the vine, past a water pump where American soldiers filled canteens and waved casually. One of them called out, "Welcome to Texas." Ruth grabbed Katherine's arm. "There, smiling at us. Don't trust it," Katherine muttered. But something in her chest loosened. Just slightly. The air smelled of grass and dust and something else, something baking. Sweet. Warm. They were herded into the largest barracks. Cots lined the walls, each with a folded blanket. Real blankets, not the lice-infested rags they'd used in the field hospital. A woman in a Red Cross uniform stood at the front. "My name is Dorothy Campbell," she said in careful, practiced German. "You will be treated according to the Geneva Convention. You will have 3 meals a day. Medical care. Work assignments. Questions. Silence." The women stared. 3 meals a day. Katherine wanted to laugh. In Germany, 1 meal a day had been a luxury. Toward the end, they'd boiled leather to make soup. "Dinner is in 1 hour." Dorothy continued. "Please wash up. The facilities are behind the barracks." As the women dispersed, Katherine caught Hargrove's eye. He looked uncomfortable, as if he didn't know whether to guard them or help them. "Sergeant," she said quietly in English, "why are you being kind to us?" He blinked, surprised she spoke his language. Then he shrugged. "Ma'am, the war's over. You're just people now. Just people." Katherine hadn't felt like people in years. The mess hall doors opened at 6 o'clock. Katherine entered with the others. Tension singing through the room like a held breath. Long tables stretched in rows. American soldiers moved between them, carrying trays. Metal trays. Not wooden bowls. Not tin cups with rust at the edges. The smell hit her first. Fresh bread. Roasted meat. Something sweet underneath it all. like apples and cinnamon mixed together. Her stomach clenched so hard, she had to grip the edge of a table. "It's a trick," Ruth whispered beside her. "They'll poison us, or it's rotten, or quiet." But Catherine's hands shook as she took a tray from the stack. The serving line moved slowly. Women ahead of her stopped, staring at the food as if it might vanish. One started crying. Another backed away, shaking her head. Katherine forced herself forward. The first server was a stocky woman with gray hair and kind eyes. She wore an apron that said, "Clara's Kitchen." "Potatoes, honey?" she asked in terrible German. Katherine nodded, mute. A scoop of mashed potatoes, creamy and steaming. Real butter melting into golden pools. The next server offered green beans, then carrots, then a slice of pork roast, thick and juicy. Then bread, white bread, soft, still warm from the oven. And at the end of the line, pie, apple pie, with a lattice crust that gleamed like something from a storybook. Catherine's vision blurred. She gripped her tray and stumbled to a table. Saturday stared at the food. Around her, the other women were doing the same. Some had already started eating, cramming food into their mouths with both hands. Others just sat, tears running down their faces. Ruth lowered herself onto the bench beside Katherine. "This can't be real. Try it," Katherine said hoarsely. She picked up her fork, cut a piece of pork, raised it to her mouth. The taste exploded across her tongue: salt, fat, herbs, richness, real meat. Not the gristle and bone they'd gnawed in Germany. Not the watery turnip soup they'd survived on for months. Real food. She chewed slowly, swallowed, felt it slide down her throat like a promise. Then she tried the potatoes. Creamy, buttery. She'd forgotten butter existed. Then the bread. Soft. Sweet. She'd forgotten bread could be soft. Then the pie. Oh God, the pie. Sugar and cinnamon and apples so tender they dissolved on her tongue. The crust flaked into buttery layers. She could taste someone's care in every bite, someone's grandmother, someone's mother, someone who baked this with love. Katherine set down her fork and wept. Around her, the mess hall filled with the sound of 200 women crying. Some sobbed openly. Others tried to muffle it. But the grief and relief and disbelief were too much to contain. Sergeant Hargrove stood near the door, watching. His face was carefully blank, but his jaw tightened. Dorothy Campbell moved between the tables, placing gentle hands on shoulders. "It's all right," she murmured. "It's all right. There's more. You can have more." But Katherine couldn't eat another bite. The sweetness was too much, too beautiful, too unbearable after all the ugliness. She pressed her face into her hands and let herself break. 3 days passed before Katherine could eat a full meal without crying. The routine established itself quickly. Wake at 6, roll call, breakfast eggs, toast, coffee with real cream, work assignments in the garden or laundry, lunch, more work, dinner, lights out at 9. It was gentler than any military routine Katherine had known. On the 4th day, she volunteered for kitchen duty. Clara Hoffman, the head cook, was a German immigrant who'd left Munich in 1923. She had her grandmother's recipes and her father's stubbornness. When Katherine entered the kitchen, Clara looked her up and down and said in Bavarian accented German, "You know how to peel potatoes without wasting half of them?" "Yes, ma'am." "Good. You're hired." The kitchen was a revelation. Sacks of flour, stacked shoulder high, crates of fresh vegetables delivered twice a week. Eggs by the hundreds. Butter in enormous blocks. Sugar, real sugar, white and crystalline, not the ersatz beet syrup they'd used in Germany. Katherine worked in silence, peeling potatoes beside 2 other POWs, Margaret, a former clerk, and Ilse, a nurse who'd lost her entire unit at Normandy. Clara moved through the kitchen like a general, barking orders but never cruel. "More salt. Watch that roast. Don't let the biscuits burn." During a break, Katherine asked the question that had haunted her since arrival. "Why?" Clara looked up from the pie dough she was rolling. "Why what? Why feed us like this? We're prisoners, enemies. In Germany, Russian prisoners got moldy bread and water. Sometimes not even that. Clara's hands stilled. Her face hardened. Child, you're in America now. We have rules here. The Geneva Convention. Yes, but also something else. Something we call decency. Decency doesn't win wars. No, Clara agreed quietly. But it wins peace. What do you think happens when you starve and brutalize prisoners? They go home full of hate. They teach their children to hate. The cycle never ends. She dusted flour from her hands. But if you feed them, if you treat them like human beings, maybe, just maybe, they remember that kindness when it's time to rebuild. Katherine thought about that. About the German soldiers she'd treated who'd spoken casually of Russian prisoners dying in the cold. About the nurses who'd looked away. About the propaganda that taught them Russians and Americans and Brits were subhuman, unworthy of mercy. And here she stood, in an enemy kitchen, eating enemy bread, learning that everything she'd been told was a lie. My mother's in Leipzig, she said suddenly. The city was bombed flat. She's probably dead. Clara's expression softened. Write to her anyway. The Red Cross delivers letters. And say what? Mother, the enemy feeds me pie while you starve in ruins. Say, Mother, I'm alive. I'm safe. I'll come home when I can. Clara pressed a warm roll into Katherine's hands. Say, there's still sweetness in the world. Katherine looked at the roll, still steaming, golden brown, made with care. She bit into it, and for the first time since the war began, she tasted something other than ash. May arrived with bluebonnets and heat. The camp garden expanded from a small plot to half an acre. Dorothy Campbell had approved it. Occupational therapy, she called it. But the women knew better. It was resurrection. It was proof that life could still grow from scorched earth. Katherine found herself assigned to the tomato section. Sergeant Hargrove brought the seedlings himself, carrying them in wooden crates. He set them down carefully, then wiped his forehead with his sleeve. These are from my mother's farm, he explained in halting German. Best tomatoes in East Texas. Katherine studied him. He was careful with his words, careful with his hands. The kind of man who'd been raised to help, not harm. You trust us with your mother's tomatoes? She asked. He smiled, a small, tired thing. Ma'am, if you can't trust a nurse with a tomato plant, who can you trust? She found herself smiling back. When had she last smiled? They worked in silence for a while, digging holes, settling plants into the red Texas soil. Ruth worked nearby, humming something under her breath, a folk song from Bavaria. The tune was bittersweet, full of longing. What's the song about? Hargrove asked. Home, Ruth said simply. A girl asking the wind to carry her back to the mountains. Hargrove nodded slowly. My dad used to sing about Tennessee. Same thing, wanting to go back to where you came from. He patted soil around a tomato plant. Maybe that's the one thing we all understand. Missing home. Katherine's throat tightened. What if there's no home to go back to? Hargrove looked at her, really looked. The way doctors looked at patients before delivering bad news. Then you build a new one. That's what my grandparents did. When they came from Ireland, everything they knew was gone, so they started over. Easy to say when you won the war. Easier to say when you've got dirt under your fingernails and seeds in your pocket. Hargrove countered gently. War's over, ma'am. Now comes the hard part, figuring out how to live again. Katherine wanted to argue. Wanted to rage against the injustice of it all. How dare he speak of new beginnings when her country lay in ruins? But she couldn't. Because he was right. Because standing in this garden, under this enormous sky, with soil on her hands and the smell of growing things around her, she felt something she hadn't felt in years. Hope, the fragile, terrifying kind. That evening, after dinner, Katherine returned to the garden alone. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of peach and lavender. She knelt beside the tomato plants and pressed her fingers into the earth. In Germany, she dug graves. Here, she was planting life. Grow, she whispered to the seedlings. Please, just grow. Behind her, from the mess hall, came the sound of women singing. A German hymn, old and mournful. But underneath it, harmonizing in a language they didn't speak, American voices joined in. Katherine closed her eyes and let the song wash over her. Perhaps this was what mercy sounded like. June brought permission to write home. The announcement came during morning roll call. Dorothy Campbell stood on the barrack steps, Red Cross armband bright against her uniform. The International Red Cross has approved mail service. You may each write 1 letter per week. Letters will be reviewed for security, but personal messages will be delivered. A murmur ran through the assembled women. Ruth grabbed Katherine's arm. We can write? Really write? Don't get your hopes up, Katherine warned. Even if the letters get through, who knows if anyone's alive to read them. But that evening, the mess hall transformed into a writing room. Tables covered with paper, pens, envelopes. Women bent over their letters, faces tight with concentration. Katherine stared at the blank page for 20 minutes. What do you say to a mother you haven't seen in 3 years? A mother who might be dead? A mother who'd sent her only daughter to war believing in the rightness of their cause? Finally, she wrote, Dearest Mama, I am alive. I am in America, in a place called Texas. They tell me you can write back, though I don't know if this will reach you, or if you are still in Leipzig. I want to tell you something strange. The Americans feed us, not scraps, Mama, real food, bread with butter, meat, vegetables from gardens we help tend. Yesterday, I ate apple pie. Do you remember making apple pie when I was small? You always burned the edges, and Papa would eat them anyway and say they were his favorite part. I don't know why I'm telling you this. Maybe because I need you to know that not everything is terrible. That even in captivity, even after losing, there is kindness. I was taught to hate these people. I saw what our bombs did to their cities. I know what our armies did in the territories we occupied. And yet here I sit, in a camp run by our enemies, and they treat me like a person, like someone worthy of a warm meal and a clean bed. I don't understand it, Mama. I don't understand how they can be so gentle when we were so cruel. Please write if you can. Please be alive. Your daughter, Katherine. She folded the letter with shaking hands. At the collection box, Sergeant Hargrove sat reviewing letters. When Katherine handed hers over, he glanced at the address Leipzig, and something flickered in his eyes. Pity? Sorrow? I'll make sure this gets out, he said quietly. Will it reach her? The Red Cross is good at finding people. Even in... He hesitated. Even in difficult situations. Katherine understood. Leipzig was rubble. The entire eastern part of Germany was rubble. But she'd written anyway. Because hope, once planted, was a stubborn thing. As she left, she passed Ruth, who was crying over her own letter. Katherine squeezed her shoulder. No words, just the weight of a hand, one survivor to another. Outside, the Texas night was vast and star-filled. Katherine looked up at constellations she didn't recognize, and wondered if her mother could see the same stars. Somewhere across the ocean was someone reading by candlelight in ruins, waiting for a letter that said, I'm alive. I remember you. I'm coming home? Katherine hoped so. God, she hoped so. July brought a new transport of POWs. These women were different. Harder. They'd been captured later in the war, after the worst of the fighting. After Germany's defeat became undeniable, they arrived with haunted eyes and clenched fists. Their leader was a woman named Greta Zimmermann, tall, severe, 40 years old, former Luftwaffe communications officer. She had the bearing of someone who'd never surrendered in her heart. At the first meal, Greta refused to eat. She sat at the table, arms crossed, staring at the food as if it were poison. Around her, 15 women from her unit did the same. Katherine watched from across the hall. She recognized that look, the rigid pride of people who'd rather starve than accept mercy from their enemies. Clara noticed too. She approached Greta's table with a plate of fried chicken and cornbread. Not hungry? She asked in German. We don't accept charity from our captors. Greta said coldly. It's not charity, it's food, and you'll eat it, or you'll get sick. I'd rather die than die quietly. Clara set the plate down with a sharp clink. But don't you dare poison the others with your pride. Half these girls are barely 20. They've got a chance at a future if they don't follow you into the grave. Greta's jaw worked. You don't understand. We fought for our country. We believed. I know what you believed. I left Germany to escape people who believed like you. Clara's voice was low and fierce. And I'll tell you what I learned. Belief doesn't fill your stomach. It doesn't heal your wounds. It doesn't bring back the dead. Food does the first. Medicine does the second. Nothing does the third. She walked away. Katherine felt she should intervene. That evening, after dinner, she approached Greta, who stood alone by the fence, staring at the sunset. You're going to lose them, Katherine said without preamble. Greta turned. Excuse me? You're women. They're hungry. They're tired. And every day you tell them to refuse food, you lose a little more of their trust. Katherine gestured toward the mess hall. I was like you when I arrived. Proud, angry, certain that accepting kindness meant betraying everything I'd fought for. And now I know that surviving isn't betrayal. It's responsibility. Katherine's voice softened. Greta, the war is over. We lost. Our cities are destroyed. Our army's gone. Our government collapsed. All we have left is ourselves, and if we let pride kill us, then we've lost twice. Greta's face was a mask. They're treating us like children. No, they're treating us like people. There's a difference. For a long moment, Greta said nothing. Then, so quietly, Katherine almost missed it. I don't know how to stop hating them. You don't have to love them. You just have to let them feed you. The next morning, Greta ate breakfast. Just toast and eggs. But she ate, and one by one, her unit followed. Katherine caught Hargrove's eye across the room. He nodded slightly, a soldier's acknowledgement of a small victory. Bitterness, Katherine thought, was like hunger. It could consume you if you let it, but it couldn't survive kindness forever. August turned the garden into abundance. Tomatoes hung heavy on the vines, red and bursting with juice. Squash sprawled across the ground. Beans climbed their trellises like green ladders to nowhere. Katherine and Ruth harvested in the early mornings, before the heat became unbearable. Look at this one, Ruth said, holding up a tomato the size of her fist. Sergeant Hargrove's mother would be proud. Katherine smiled. We should save seeds. For when we go home, the words hung in the air. Home. They'd all received letters by now, or most of them had. Katherine's mother had written back. A single page on thin paper. My darling girl, I am alive. The house is gone, but I am with Aunt Hilda in the countryside. Come home when you can. I will wait. Love, Mama. Simple, direct, alive. Katherine had carried that letter in her pocket ever since, touching it like a talisman. Ruth hadn't been so lucky. Her family's farm had been in the Soviet zone. No word, just silence. They picked tomatoes in quiet companionship, filling baskets that would become sauce, soup, salad, food for the mess hall, food for women who'd once been enemies and were now just people trying to survive. Do you think it'll be different? Ruth asked suddenly. When we go back? Different how? Everything. The country, the people, us. Katherine considered. I think we'll be different. I don't know about the rest. I keep having this dream. Ruth continued, her voice distant. I'm home, in my village, and everything's the same. The church, the bakery, the fountain in the square. But when I try to talk to people, they can't hear me. I'm invisible, like I died in the war, and became a ghost. Katherine reached over and squeezed her hand. You're not a ghost. How do you know? Because ghosts don't eat pie. Ruth laughed, a startled, genuine sound. God, the pie. I'm going to miss the pie. We'll learn to make it. Clara promised to write down the recipe. They worked until noon, then carried their baskets to the kitchen. Clara inspected their haul and nodded approval. Good work. We'll make sauce tonight. You want to help? Katherine did. There was something meditative about cooking, the repetition, the transformation of raw ingredients into something nourishing. She and Clara stood side by side, blanching tomatoes, peeling skins, crushing flesh into a pot that bubbled with garlic and herbs. "Your mother's alive," Clara said after a while. It wasn't a question. "Yes, good. You have a reason to go home. What about the ones who don't?" Katherine thought of Ruth, of the women still waiting for letters that would never come. Then they make new reasons. New families. New homes. Clara stirred the pot, releasing a cloud of fragrant steam. "That's what I did. Left Germany. Started over. It wasn't easy, but it was possible." Katherine watched the sauce simmer, red and rich. "Do you miss it?" "Germany, every day. But I don't miss what it became." Clara tasted the sauce, added salt. "I miss the country that loved bread and music and long summer evenings. That country's gone. Maybe forever. But maybe people like you can rebuild something better." Katherine didn't answer. But she stirred the pot and let herself imagine it. A Germany without war. A Germany with gardens and pie. And children who didn't know the taste of hunger. It seemed impossible. But then again, so had kindness from enemies. September brought newspapers. Dorothy Campbell distributed them during mail call. American papers, German papers, international reports. The women crowded around, desperate for news from home. Katherine unfolded the New York Times. The headlines were stark. "Germany begins reconstruction. Millions displaced. Famine expected in winter." She read the articles with growing dread. Berlin was a wasteland. Hamburg, destroyed. Dresden, her city, existed only as rubble and memory. Photographs showed children digging through ruins, looking for food. Old women pulling carts of salvaged wood. Men with empty eyes, standing in bread lines. "We did this," Ruth whispered beside her, staring at a photo of Cologne. "We followed them, and they did this to us." "We did it to others first," Katherine said quietly. She thought of the photos she'd seen during the war photos the government had shown them of their glorious victories. Cities in Poland, burning. Villages in Russia, erased. They'd cheered. God help them. They'd cheered. Greta approached, her face pale. "They're saying there's no food, that people are eating grass and tree bark. Then we go home and help them," Katherine said. "With what? We have nothing." Katherine thought about the garden. About the seeds Ruth had been saving in small envelopes. About Clara's recipe cards, carefully copied. About the lessons in canning, preserving, making something from nothing. "We have knowledge," she said. "We know how to grow food now. How to preserve it. How to make a little stretch into a lot. That won't be enough. Maybe not. But it's something." That evening, Katherine sought out Sergeant Hargrove. She found him near the garden, checking the irrigation lines. "Sergeant, can I ask you something?" He straightened. "Of course, ma'am. When we leave, and I know we will, eventually can we take seeds with us?" Hargrove blinked. "Seeds? From the garden. To plant back home." Katherine gestured to the tomato plants, still producing despite the late summer heat. "Your mother's tomatoes. They grow well. They could grow in Germany, too." Understanding dawned on his face. "You want to take a piece of this back with you?" "I want to take hope back with me." He was quiet for a long moment. Then he nodded. "I'll talk to Mrs. Campbell. I don't see why not. Seeds aren't weapons." "No," Katherine agreed. "They're the opposite of weapons." She left him there and returned to the barracks. Ruth was on her bunk, surrounded by small paper packets, each one labeled in careful script. Tomatoes. Beans. Squash. Carrots. "I've been saving them for weeks," Ruth confessed. "I didn't know if they'd let us keep them, but I couldn't help myself. I kept thinking, what if we could make something grow again? What if we could feed people?" Katherine sat beside her. "We'll make it grow. Somehow." Ruth looked at her with eyes that were older than her years. "You really believe that?" "I have to believe it. Otherwise, what's the point of surviving?" Outside, the Texas sun set in a blaze of orange and gold. Tomorrow, there would be more news. More evidence of devastation. More reasons to despair. But tonight, two women sat with packets of seeds, planning a future that seemed impossible but necessary. And somewhere, in the ruins of Leipzig, Catherine's mother waited. October arrived with paperwork, release forms, transportation schedules, repatriation orders. The war had been over for months. Now came the complicated logistics of sending thousands of POWs back to a country that barely existed. Catherine's name appeared on the November transport list. She stood in Dorothy Campbell's office, holding the paper with numb fingers. November 15th? Barring complications, yes. You'll be transported to New York, then by ship to Bremen. From there, you'll make your way to Leipzig. Dorothy's voice was kind, but professional. I know it soon, soon. 5 months in this camp. 5 months of regular meals and soft beds and a garden that grew things. 5 months of learning that the world could be gentle. And now she'd returned to a world of rubble and hunger and ghosts. I want to thank you, Catherine said quietly. For everything. Dorothy came around the desk and took Catherine's hands. You don't owe me thanks. You survived a war. You deserve to go home. I don't know what home is anymore. Then you'll figure it out. You're strong. You'll make it. Catherine wanted to believe her. That evening, there was a farewell dinner. Clara had outdone herself. Fried chicken, mashed potatoes, green beans, cornbread, and 3 kinds of pie. The mess hall was decorated with paper chains the women had made. It looked absurdly festive. Sergeant Hargrove gave a short speech, stumbling over his German. We know you're going home to difficult situations. We know it won't be easy, but we all hope that you'll remember this place. Not as a prison, but as a place where people tried to be decent to each other. Catherine stood to respond. She hadn't planned to speak, but the words came anyway. When I arrived here, I believed you were monsters. I believed all Americans were monsters, because that's what we were taught. But you fed me. You gave me a place to sleep. You let me plant a garden and write letters and remember what it meant to be human. Her voice cracked. I don't have the words to thank you. In my language or yours, all I can say is this: I will remember. And I will try to be the kind of person who offers bread to strangers, even when they're my enemies. There wasn't a dry eye in the room. After dinner, Hargrove found her outside. He pressed a small canvas bag into her hands. For your mother. It's not much. Catherine opened it. Inside, seeds, dozens of packets, tomatoes, beans, squash, carrots, and at the bottom, a handwritten recipe card. Clara's apple pie. Tell her, Hargrove said softly, that gardens grow anywhere if you're stubborn enough. Catherine couldn't speak. She just nodded and held the bag like it was made of gold. Later, lying in her bunk for one of the last times, she thought about the journey ahead. The ship, the ruins, the uncertainty, but also the seeds, small, brown, ordinary, and full of impossible promises. November 15th, 1945. Catherine stood at the gate with her small suitcase, a gift from the Red Cross. Inside, 2 changes of clothes, a toothbrush, a bar of soap, and the canvas bag of seeds. Ruth was beside her, along with 30 other women from the first transport. They were going home, or going back, at least. Whether it was home remained to be seen. The bus engine rumbled. Hargrove stood by the door, checking names off a list. When Catherine approached, he looked up and smiled. Sad, warm, genuine. Safe travels, Miss Vogel. Thank you, Sergeant. For everything. Take care of those seeds. I will. She climbed aboard. Found a seat by the window. Watched as the camp receded, the barracks, the garden, the mess hall where she'd learned to taste sweetness again. The journey was long. Texas to New York by train. 3 days in a processing center. Then the ship crowded, cold, full of women who'd once been enemies and were now just refugees. Catherine stood at the railing as they approached Germany. The coast emerged from gray mist-broken docks, damaged buildings, smoke still rising from some areas. It looks dead, Ruth whispered. It looks waiting, Catherine countered. The train from Bremen to Leipzig took 12 hours. Katherine watched the countryside roll past fields, scarred by tank treads, villages reduced to shells, forests stripped for firewood. Every mile was evidence of war's price. Leipzig station was a skeleton. The roof was gone. The platforms cracked. But people moved through it, survivors, scavengers, those too stubborn to die. Katherine found her mother in Aunt Hilda's farmhouse, 20 miles outside the city. The house was small, cold, half its windows boarded up. But when Katherine walked through the door and saw her mother's face gaunt, lined, but alive, she fell to her knees and wept. They held each other for a long time. Later, over weak tea and bread that tasted like sawdust, Katherine told her mother everything. The camp, the food, the garden, the kindness. Her mother listened without interrupting. When Katherine finished, she said simply, "You were lucky. I know, many weren't. I know that too." Katherine pulled out the bag of seeds, spread the packets on the table. "I brought these for spring. I thought we could plant them, make something grow." Her mother touched the packets with trembling fingers. "Tomatoes. I haven't had a tomato in 3 years. Then we'll grow tomatoes, and beans, and squash, and we'll share them with the neighbors, and they'll share what they grow, and maybe we'll survive." Her mother looked at her with eyes that had seen too much death. "You think seeds can fix this?" "No. But I think seeds can start something. And starting is better than giving up." Her mother was quiet for a long moment. Then she nodded. "All right. We'll plant in the spring." That night, Katherine lay in a cold bed in a damaged house in a ruined country and thought about Texas, about gardens under enormous skies, about pies that tasted like love. She thought about Hargrove's words, "Gardens grow anywhere if you're stubborn enough," and she decided to be stubborn. Spring, 1946. Katherine stood in the garden plot behind Aunt Hilda's farmhouse, pressing seeds into cold earth. Her mother worked beside her, marking rows with string and stakes. The ground was hard, the soil poor. But they'd mixed in compost from the kitchen scraps they'd hoarded all winter, and Katherine had faith, stubborn faith, but faith nonetheless. Ruth had written from Hamburg. She'd found work with the British occupation forces, translating. She'd planted her seeds in a window box, and tiny green shoots were emerging. "It's working," she wrote. "They're growing." Katherine smiled at the letter. "They're growing." 3 words that meant everything. The village slowly came back to life that spring. Other women returned from camps, from hiding, from exile. They all brought something: knowledge, strength, stories. They shared what they had because there was no other choice. Katherine's tomato plants sprouted in May, small and green and impossibly hopeful. By June, they were climbing their makeshift trellises. By July, the first fruits appeared small, hard, green. By August, they were ripe. Katherine picked the first tomato on a warm morning. It was smaller than the Texas tomatoes, scarred by hail, but it was red and real and theirs. She sliced it and shared it with her mother and aunt. They ate slowly, savoring. "It tastes like summer," Aunt Hilda said. "It tastes like America," her mother added. "It tastes like survival," Katherine corrected. She saved seeds from that tomato, and from the next, and the next. By autumn, she had dozens of packets. She gave them to neighbors, to friends, to strangers who knocked on the door asking if she had any food to spare. "Plant them in the spring," she told each person. "They're stubborn. They'll grow." Years passed. Katherine became a teacher, training nurses in the new Germany. She married a doctor who'd lost everything in the war and was rebuilding, like her. They had 2 children who grew up hearing stories about a camp in Texas where the enemy had been kind. She never forgot. Every summer, she grew tomatoes. Every fall, she baked apple pie using Clara's recipe adapted for German ingredients, but still recognizably the same. And every time she sliced a tomato or pulled a pie from the oven, she thought about Sergeant Hargrove and Clara and Dorothy Campbell and all the people who'd chosen to be decent when they could have been cruel. In 1968, Katherine received a letter from America. From Hargrove, now retired, living on his mother's farm in Texas. Dear Miss Vogel, I hope this finds you well. I think of you sometimes. And the garden we planted together. I wonder if those seeds found good soil. My mother passed last year, but her tomatoes still grow. I like to think some of yours do too. With respect and hope, David Hargrove. Katherine wrote back, Dear David, the seeds found soil. The tomatoes still grow. My children eat them and ask why they're special. I tell them, because they were a gift from people who could have hated us, but chose to feed us instead. That is the only kind of victory worth having. With gratitude, Katherine. She sent the letter, and that evening, she made pie. It tasted like peace.